This is actually not Brian Brody. This is Katherine Henry, and we are here in the city of Lowell. We came to participate in the city council meeting, but with the city council meeting being reduced to a Zoom meeting, we have dozens of supporters here, 3 of whom would like to address during public comment, all with this one single raised hand. We did not want to flood the system with having all these people individually logging on. I myself will be speaking on behalf of myself as well as Steve Bukala. I will be addressing a letter, an email that I sent to you shortly before the council meeting started this evening. Steve Bukala worked for the city of Lowell for just shy of 25 years. He started in Lowell in November 1995 and was promoted to the Chief of Police in November 2013. Throughout these years, Chief Bukala has enjoyed working with the people and businesses of Lowell. On Thursday, June 4th, 2020, that came to an abrupt end. On that date, the city manager gave Chief Bukala a disciplinary action report requiring during a meeting with the mayor and the city attorney. This so-called report accuses Chief Bukala of conduct unbecoming an officer, which includes impairing the efficient operation of the department. Number 2, allowing personal feelings to influence his professional conduct, stating that his posting his personal feelings on departmental social media was affecting the department's perception within the community. And number 3, this unidentified social media violation, calling the June 2nd, 2020 post, quote, unneeded personal commentary which inserted political and debatable issues which caused unnecessary concern and unnecessary negative portrayal of the city. This report continues by saying that you serve all citizens regardless of viewpoint, and your credibility as an impartial law enforcement officer is critical to your role as chief. I can no longer condone remarks made publicly which discredit your role and the Lowell Police Department and conflict with these expectations. It is our role to protect and serve, not to opine on the issues of the day. We do not insert ourselves into political issues, whether directly or indirectly. Your rhetoric and actions on these 3 issues are unprofessional and reflect poorly on the city and the department. This pattern of behavior is not acceptable. As for conduct unbecoming an officer, the City of Lowell Police Policies and Procedures, which I'm going to call CLPPP, states, quote, personnel shall conduct themselves at all times, both on and off duty, in such a manner as to reflect most favorably on the department, end quote, and that conduct unbecoming includes that which, quote, impairs the efficient operation of the department, end quote. So what is the most basic function or operation of the department? Well, Chapter 2 reveals that, quote, the mission of the department is to protect life and property and all rights guaranteed by law, end quote. Moreover, the CLPPP requires personnel to, quote, obey all laws of the United States and of any state or local jurisdiction, end quote. In fact, the CLPPP puts personnel on notice that, quote, unsatisfactory performance may be demonstrated by a lack of knowledge of law, end quote. The CLPPP goes one step further and even prohibits personnel from following, quote, any order that they know would require them to commit an illegal act, end quote. Since the contested portion of the social media post is what allegedly, quote, impaired the efficient operation of the department, end quote, we must look at what it said. As Mayor DeVore pointed out, he wanted the last sentence removed, which read, we at the Lowell Police Department support the legally armed citizen and the Second Amendment.
Catherine, that's 4 minutes.
Thank you. I'm speaking for the both of us. As referenced above, Lowell Police must act in a way to reflect favorably on the LPD, the city's law enforcement agency. Such law enforcement necessarily includes the protection of, quote, all rights guaranteed by law, end quote. Among others, the U.S. Constitution secures in the Second Amendment, quote, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, end quote, while the Michigan Constitution in Article 1, Section 6 also guarantees, quote, that every person has the right to keep and bear arms, end quote. Chief Bukala worded that social media post to both give notice to the people of Lowell as to what the men were doing, but also to remind everyone that as a law enforcement agency, the LPD supports the citizens who are lawful in their use of firearms and the constitutional right to do so. To state anything to the contrary would have violated the mission of the LPD of protecting all rights guaranteed by law. Indeed, Chief Bukala would have been subject to discipline for, quote, unsatisfactory performance as demonstrated by a lack of knowledge of that law, end quote, which necessarily includes the constitutional protections guaranteed to all citizens. In fact, Chief Bukala has the duty to ignore any order or directive that would require him to commit an illegal act, such as denying those men their Second Amendment rights. But more than that, as a public officer, not police officer, a public officer such as yourselves, Chief Bukala took an oath to, quote, support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state, end quote. In fact, every single public officer in the city of Lowell and all across the state of Michigan takes that same oath of office as required by Article 11, Section 1 of the Michigan Constitution. So calling Chief Bukala's social media post, quote, conduct unbecoming, end quote, and an act, quote, impairing the efficient operation of the department, end quote, is the farthest thing from the truth. In fact, his statement shows nothing but how faithful he is to the oath he took when becoming a police officer. Every single public officer, council member, city manager, city attorney, etc., who was involved in punishing Chief Bukala for explicitly following his oath of office is him or herself violating that exact oath of office they each took themselves. That'd be you guys. If we continue this discussion further, we will also reveal the myriad of federal and state statutory violations of which those same Lowell public officers are guilty for such acts. Calling the LPD support of the Constitution or any provision thereof personal feelings or political debate is therefore void of all legal authority and even common sense. It is not a personal feeling, nor is it political, for a public official, let alone the law enforcement agency of a community, to publicly support the Constitution. To state that reveals either a willful disregard for the said Constitution or an intolerable ignorance of the same, especially considering the oath each of Lowell's public officials took to explicitly support both the U.S. and Michigan Constitutions. For any of you to publicly reduce such support to, quote, personal feelings or political debate is nothing less than dereliction of duty. By forcing an immediate resignation of Chief Bukala for his public expression of support for the Constitution, the city manager, the mayor, and city attorney engaged in, quote, unprofessional behavior that reflects poorly on the city and the department, end quote. And clearly, as stated in the letter, quote, this pattern of behavior is not acceptable. As a side note, the unfortunate timing has no bearing on the rights guaranteed in the U.S. and Michigan Constitution, and it is your behaviors in violating the Constitution that convey the dangerous message. Chief Bukala took that oath of office seriously, and his commitment to it did not end the day he was illegally forced to resign. He should be made whole, and the community needs to be reassured this unconstitutional behavior will never happen again in Lowell. With that in mind, Chief Bukala is willing to forego what is rightfully owed to him if the city agrees, number one, to keep him on the payroll through November 21st at 40 hours a week. Number two, this will include and not be in addition to his accrued vacation and personal time. Number three, such pay will continue to include the deductions that he would normally be receiving, such as for his retirement. Number four, among other things, Chief Bukala will be willing to forego the additional $400 monthly payment he was receiving in lieu of insurance. Number five, the city will issue an official statement that, quote, the city of Lowell stands with Chief Bukala in his support of the U.S. and Michigan Constitutions, expressing support for the rights guaranteed to individuals under those constitutions is not a personal feeling, nor is it up for political debate. It is the very thing each public official, is sworn to do under Article 11, Section 1 of the Michigan Constitution of 1963. While the chief was originally forced to resign, that issue has been resolved, and both the chief and the city agreed to a mutually beneficial separation, wherein the chief entrusts the city to continue supporting and enforcing the U.S. and Michigan Constitutions, end quote. This agreement would completely resolve everything between you. So we ask you each today to take your oaths of office seriously, to remember that you are required to support the U.S. and Michigan Constitutions, whether you like them or not, and that a huge legal battle can be avoided, allowing the community to heal if the proper action is taken now. But as Chief Bukala is also tasked with defending those constitutions, we will need your agreement in short order to avoid the legal action he would otherwise be forced to take in order to abide by that oath. And there are two other individuals that would like to speak during public comment time on the same line.
Woo! Do what's right.
we turn that up?
Another 20 minutes? You mean,
I had two people I spoke on behalf of.
She did it in under 10 minutes. So we're gonna let the other two people talk for 5 minutes.
Okay.